Hello and welcome to Love from the Other Side. If you're on this video, perhaps you too are in need of hope. We bring you stories from around the world of people who have shared their near-death experiences. While you may not agree with everything that they share, we ask that all comments be kept respectful and kind. With that being said, let's get started with today's video. Reinne Pasarow was born in California and studied economics at UCLA. She was a successful entrepreneur, a wife, and a mother of 5 children. She was prominent and an active member of the Baha'i faith and is known worldwide for her extraordinary near-death experience. This experience occurred in 1966. This, of course, was 9 years prior to the famous bestseller Life After Death by Dr. Raymond Moody. Because it was documented that she had been pronounced dead at the hospital, her case gained widespread attention after the release of Mr. Moody's book. She recounted her NDE on the ABC television program 2020, and she was also interviewed by CNN and NBC. Today, we bring you her story. Reinne became unconscious following an allergic food reaction and had one of the most transcendental NDEs ever documented. Here is her NDE experience in her own words. I only became aware when I heard the very loud sound of fire engines arriving. I heard my best friend from elementary school calling to me. She was calling, "Reinne, don't die, Reinne." I heard this, and it seemed as if it was in a foreign language to me. I finally computed the meaning of this and realized that my life was in danger. I had an obligation to fight for my life because of my mother and my friend, because she had such a terror in her voice that it cut through to my heart. I tried to fight for my life, but the battle became overwhelming. At this point, I just surrendered myself, my soul, to the power that brings us all into existence and that gives us life. I knew that this was the source of all life and the way of all things. I surrendered to that, and I entered into a state of peacefulness. Just like that, I became a ball of light or energy in the midst of this crowd that was circling a body. I became massively aware, unlike any awareness I had during my physical existence. I was not really aware of myself. I was aware of everyone around me. I was aware of my mother and my neighbors and my friends and firemen and what they were thinking and what they were feeling and what they were hoping and what they were praying. This was such a pummeling input of information that I was all at once overwhelmed and confused and rather disoriented. I followed their attention to something on the sidewalk, and I looked at a body on the sidewalk. I looked at the curve of the wrist bone, and I recognized it. I remember looking at it and thinking, that looks so much like my wrist bone. And then I became aware that the thing on the sidewalk, that thing that suddenly became a piece of meat to me, was what I had identified as myself before. I had no connection with it, other than that I had been in it for a very long time. But it had nothing to do with me because suddenly I was more of a person than I had ever been before. I was more conscious than I could ever be. I was free of the limitations of being a physical being. I looked at my body and I was repulsed with the grief and the turmoil around it and the very idea that I had ever considered something physical to be my reality, to be a human reality. And with that, again, I was bumped way up above some light wires. From that point, I could watch everything beneath me, but I was not as closely associated with them. I was completely feeling everything they were feeling. I watched my mother and a boy come out of the house and up the hill, which I could not have seen physically. I was very sad for my mother. I was very sad for my friend who kept calling me, and I was very sad for the child who had come out of the house. I was very sad that he would think I was dead. So my concern was for them. I spent my time observing them and calling to them that everything was as it should be, that everything was fine, that I was free, that it was wonderful, that I loved them, and that they loved me, and that the bond, unlike physical bonds, would never be destroyed. I tried to communicate this to them over and over. I realized that I had no mouth, I had no body. They could not hear what I was saying to them. I would have to leave them in the same hands I had left myself in the process of dying. With that, I turned away, just sort of like a ball, just turned away. My attention turned away lovingly, but knowing that there was nothing I could do. I turned away from them and began to pull up. I became aware, as if I were a camera on a spaceship or something, of our place, my particular little street, then my particular little town. I kept pulling up and up to a point where I could observe the whole earth. This was wonderful. The earth was alive and was singing. The earth was singing a single song, and in that song, everyone had a voice. Every human being had a very important note to add to this precious song of earth. It was a song of love, and every living thing had something to add to the song of earth. Every one of these essences was very much connected. I was seeing it not like we normally see. I was seeing from a macroscope, from the point of view of a spaceship, and from a microscopic vantage point. Microscopic in that I could see an amoeba in the ocean that was connected to the song of the heart of all of humanity, and that this world was responding to the song in our hearts in a miraculous, unified, and beautiful way. I too began to sing. I was so overcome with joy. It wasn't a song, obviously, with the mouth. I had no mouth. I had no body. I simply was. I became a part of that song and very full of joy that I could have something to contribute to this sacred beauty of our earth and all of our people. I became very aware that as we have a unique influence on our world, if we are not actively doing something, we influence this planet by our state of being. We influence this planet very positively if we are filled with love and respect for others, or negatively if our hearts are negative. At this point, I became aware there was a light calling me from somewhere else, and I entered into what people speak of as the tunnel. I will speak of it as though I did not quite perceive it as a tunnel. It was a transition place where I became aware of other beings who seemed to be rather disoriented, rather confused and lost, and some of these beings were moving through to their home. I simply wanted to go home. I moved through this place and I became aware that I was not moving like we move physically. When we move physically, we have intent and we have a goal, and we move step by step to that goal. But what moved me through this place was love. It was the love of God and the love of all things sacred and all things beautiful and all things just. I could go on, but this is what propelled me on. It was my connection and affection for God. As I came to the end of this place, I wondered if I would be alone. And just like that, I was with my uncle. It was like there were two lights that were put together, one red and one blue that made purple light. I was aware of things about him I had never been aware of in life. I didn't spend much time with him, and I didn't know him well. He lived in the South, and I lived in California. But it was a very joyful reunion, and I became aware that he was concerned that I was there because he communicated to me instantaneously that my mother could not stand the loss of a child. He was confused, yet he knew that everything was as it should be. From that point, I became very attracted to the light, and this attraction was like an irresistible magnet. I loved that light. I loved what was pulling me home. I moved past my uncle into what I can best define as a sea of light. It was as if every atom in the universe had been electrified with color and light and sound, but more than that, with totally unconditional love. It was welcoming to me. I dove into this ocean, and with each moment I felt more rapture and more joy and more just absolutely unspeakable love. As I moved through the sea, I became aware that I was moving to the center of the sea of light, which I perceived, how can I say this, as a gnat flying into the sun. That is the perspective that I had for the sea of light. Then, in an instant, again, like a clap, I entered into this light, and I became one with this light. In this light, I was no longer an individual, no longer a person, but simply a part of this light. I became like the phoenix. I was destroyed. It was the most blissful, most excruciatingly beautiful moment that I could imagine. It seemed to me to be the apex of all existence. It was the point where one was no more. One was simply a part of the light. After being in this state for what seemed to be time beyond time, I was gathered again together like sands from the shore as an individual, and I was called to account for my deeds. This recounting for the deeds of one's life is not what you would think at all in the terms of this life, because what was important were the choices I made, and what was more important than the choices I made were my motivations and my intent, and really the state of my heart in doing every single action. I experienced in a holographic awareness that was instantaneous how every action that one takes is like a stone cast into the water. And if it's loving, that stone goes out and touches the first person that it's intended for, and then it touches another person, and then it touches another person, because that person interacts with other people, and so on and so on. Every action has a reverberating effect on every single one of us in the face of this planet. So if I had committed a loving action, it was like love upon love upon love. All purely loving action was the most wonderful thing that I could ever have achieved in my life. This had more meaning than to have been a Rockefeller or a president of the United States, or to have been a great scientist and to have invented something incredible. If I had committed a truly pure and loving action, it had reverberated throughout the stuff of every individual on the planet, and I felt that the action of reverberating through them and through myself. I felt this in a way that is way beyond what we can feel on this plane of existence. So the significance of one's actions totally changed. What was not important was anything that I had owned or known intellectually. There is a sense of intellectual pride. Not that knowledge is bad, knowledge is good. But what was important was the purity and motivation of every action. And I recall that the most important of my actions was an instant that I would never have recalled except for the near-death experience. Many years ago, I had worked every summer as a volunteer with children. There was a day that camp went on, and I spent all summer going every day, 8 hours a day, to this day camp. And there was a child one time. I had taken a child aside on a very hot day, and this was not a charming or particularly lovable child, but I wanted this child to feel loved. I wanted this child to feel really the love that God brought him into existence and that brought all of us into existence. I took him aside, although I wasn't religiously motivated formally. I just wanted him to feel love. I took him aside and gave him something to drink and just spent some time with him. And he was very agitated, but I wanted him to feel that love, and that was the greatest of all actions, and that filled me with unspeakable and incomprehensible joy. And it was not an action that anyone noticed. It was not an action that I even recalled, and it was not an action that I had done with any thought of any reward. It was simply an action motivated by love, by selfless love, and this had great meaning. I was catapulted back down what I perceived to be a tunnel. This time, it was down a rainbow tunnel of light, sound, and vibrational frequency of love. With a terribly hard crash, I became aware of the scene I had left earlier. The fire trucks and now an ambulance. There were men who were picking up my body and loading it into the ambulance. I was in a state of complete grief. I felt that I had become Eve and was cast out of the Garden of Eden. As I was descending down this tunnel, my heart was already attached to my home beyond. I was begging not to leave. I crashed down into this realm of existence and was suddenly confused by time and space. It was as if I had never existed physically. I was suddenly disoriented. My concern was for my mother because she was by herself and she was losing a 16-year-old daughter. She knew that this was happening because the ambulance attendant looked at the driver in front and said DOA, DOA, which means, of course, dead on arrival. The driver turned off the siren and slowed down the ambulance. Before, he had been driving in a very reckless manner. We were coming out of the mountains, and as we did that, my concern was for the pain of my mother. I simply wanted to comfort her and to wrap my soul around her, to soften the loss of a daughter, the loss of a child. I found myself simply praying for her. I followed the ambulance to the hospital and watched my body as it was unloaded. My mother followed the gurney into the emergency room. I watched as the first doctor went to work on me. I wasn't particularly interested in the first doctor because the first doctor had, that day, been through motorcycle accidents coming out of the mountains. He had been through a very long day, and he was not concerned with someone who had been brought in through dead on arrival. He had no connection with me. He didn't care and had no affection. So I had no interest in watching what he did because my interest was based on affection and love. Then I left the emergency room and was above my mother and some friends who had followed her into the other room. I again tried to communicate with them. I tried to let them know that this is a very joyous occasion. I am dead on arrival. Hopefully all would go well. They're never going to be able to revive me. I was going to be dead now. Death had become life to me. Death was not something to be frightened of, but something to look forward to. What happened then was the first doctor pronounced me dead and was sending my body off to the morgue. My own personal physician, who was a country doctor and a very gruff man, stormed into the emergency room in a tuxedo with his black bag. He looked at the nurse on the phone who was calling the morgue, and looked at the doctor who was washing his hands, and looked at my covered body and said, "What the hell happened here? Where is the patient?" They said, "She's dead on arrival." He said, "The hell she was." He proceeded to scream at the other nurse who was sort of standing off in a corner. "I want injections of adrenaline. Bring them to me immediately and come over here and assist me." He began to go to work on my body, and he began to beat my chest and began to shock. I was simply terrified by this turn of events and disgusted that they would treat a body so brutally. All of a sudden, I sort of became protective towards my body, even though I wanted nothing to do with it. I began to protect it. They could at least be nice about it, but they were beating on my chest and shocking my body. And I was up in the corner of the emergency room accompanied by other essences who were keeping me contained in that emergency room. Reinne goes on to describe how she finally returned to her body as a result of the doctor's last effort to revive her. When she was revived, she couldn't understand or accept that she had returned to the physical world, which was so horrible compared to the light and love that she experienced in heaven. The next day, her doctor burst into her hospital room, swearing at her and asked her, "What the hell did you do to yourself?" In tears, Reinne angrily told her doctor that she was dead and that he had no right to bring her back. At this, her doctor was shocked and stood back to give her a long, discerning look. He told her, "You are not dead because you're not dead now." Reinne continued crying and told him about some of what she experienced while in heaven, but this only made her doctor become more concerned about her mental state, and he had a psychiatrist come and talk to her. When the psychiatrist came to visit Reinne, the psychiatrist sat down and told Reinne that she was not leaving until Reinne convinced her that she was not crazy for not wanting to live. Reinne explained to her that there were no words to describe what she had experienced. But then it occurred to Reinne that her doctor would probably have her committed to a psych ward unless she could convince the psychiatrist that she was not crazy. So she told the psychiatrist about her NDE and about heaven and about the love that she experienced. However, the psychiatrist wanted to know the details about what she claimed to have transpired in the emergency room. So Reinne told her everything that happened there. The psychiatrist said to Reinne that she was going to investigate to see if what Reinne had said was true. It was about 2 or 3 hours later when the psychiatrist returned, and Reinne noticed how the psychiatrist appeared to be as white as a sheet. The psychiatrist looked at her and told her she was right. She was dead. Everything Reinne explained about what happened in the ER did indeed occur. There was a blonde nurse. There was a dark-haired nurse about 40 years old. There was a young doctor who was exhausted from treating people involved in a motorcycle accident. There was no cardiologist on duty, and her doctor did want to inject adrenaline directly into her heart, but decided not to. The psychiatrist told Reinne, "You're right. You're not crazy." Reinne then asked her if there was anything she could do to help her. Her psychiatrist replied that psychiatry had nothing to offer to help her, and she recommended that Reinne see a clergy about it. Reinne replied that she couldn't just do that. The psychiatrist then advised that Reinne never talk about her experience again to anyone, even to those people that she knows. After her life review, Reinne wondered about the destiny of the human race, and with that thought, she was shown the evolution of the history of humanity and its probable future. Reinne was also shown catastrophic earth changes, which were the result of human conflict on this planet, suggesting the earth and everything in it is a giant organism. She described the changes on the earth as follows. Simultaneously with this wonderful process, there was great chaos and destruction going on in the world. There was a great breakdown in all of our institutions and systems, governmental, educational, religious, intellectual, and scientific. The breakdown was such that society was reduced to bands of people acting like wolves who were filled with hatred, selfishness, and darkness. Reinne also saw that there was a small group of people who were identified as the just, and they were striving to bring about a new civilization and a new creation of peace, and bring about the great spiritual development humanity needs at this time. These people were not powerful or wealthy, and were not involved in tremendous institutions. They were young and struggling, and in the process of their struggling, they were trying to bring about this spiritual development and a new civilization during the times of earth changes. Reinne was also shown the seat of the Universal House of Justice, which had not yet been built. She saw this building exactly as it was built later and was shown in its location. She saw this magnificent building in a land she recognized as old yet new, on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Reinne later discovered a distinguished Jewish author named Theodor Herzl, who in 1902 wrote a novel about Israel called The Old New Land. In the 1980s, Reinne traveled there and saw the building on the Mediterranean coast on the Mount of Carmel in Israel. Reinne saw that these earth changes would ultimately lead to the establishment of God's kingdom of heaven on earth. She states, at the end of this general period of transition, Humanity was to be born anew, with a new sense of this place in the universe. The birth process, however, as in all the kingdoms, was exquisitely painful. Humanity would emerge humbled yet educated, peaceful, and at last unified. After her NDE, Reinne was never the same again. The events she participated in on the other side and the things that she saw and sensed have all been reported by other NDEers, something that she did not know at the time and would learn only in the years to come. In her words, she said, "Every particle of my being had been shaken. Every belief, every value, and every goal had to be re-evaluated after my luminous journey. The near-death experience for me was a great liberation, a rebirth, and its effects can still be felt in my daily life. Most of all, as a result of the experience, never again could I fear death. Never again could I look upon life as being anything less than a divine gift that transcends the limits of this physical realm." Her religious view of life after death corresponds with NDE testimonies. She says the world really is a transitory phase, like a period of gestation. The challenge for us is to make spiritual choices in a physical life. Death is really a messenger of joy for human beings to enter into the light. Love is the secret of God's holy dispensation, the manifestation of the all-merciful, the fountain of all spiritual outpourings. Love is heaven's kindly light. The Holy Spirit's eternal breath vivifies the human soul. Love is the cause of God's revelation to man, the vital bond inherent, according with the divine creation, in the reality of all things. Love is the one mean that ensures true happiness, both in this world and in the next. Love is the light that guides in the darkness. Love is the link that unites God with man to ensure the progress of every illuminated soul. Love is the most great law that rules mighty in heaven, the unique power that binds together the diverse elements of this material world. Love reveals with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe. Love is the spirit of life unto the adoring spirit of mankind, the establisher of true civilization in the mortal world, and the shedder of imperishable glory upon every high-aiming race and nation. Well, Reinne ascended for the final time from her earthly body to her beautiful spirit in heaven on January 17th, 2020. The story of her near-death experiences have inspired many, and I hope that it inspired you as well. Reinne's spiritual teachings and experiences served the basis of her 2018 book, Answers from Heaven, The Near-Death Experiences of Reinne Pasarow. Reinne is survived by 5 children, 4 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, her brother, her sister, nieces and nephews, and her beloved husband, Michael. Her greatest hope in life was for the unity and equality of all people. If you would like to read her book, I will put a link in the description section of this video where you can find that book. As always, thank you for spending time with us, and if you haven't done so yet, I would like to invite you to become the newest subscriber to Love from the Other Side. And if you hit that bell icon, that will let you know when we upload new videos such as this. Until next time, God bless.